Hello and welcome back to my channel, Little Pages for Little Learners. My name is Mary and today I have another book review for you. Today we are going to take a voyage to a magical land where mythical creatures, princesses, and miners are all waiting for us in George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin. I read this book for the Beaches and Books Readathon in 2024, and this book was for the prompt to read a book during a rainstorm. As I mentioned before, The Princess and the Goblin is written by George MacDonald, and the AR reading level is 6.1. This book is a classic, and it deserves a little bit more time and attention than I gave some of the other books in the Beaches and Books Readathon, and especially a little bit of a setup about the author, George MacDonald. So before I get into the book, I am going to take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about this amazing author, George MacDonald. As an adult, George MacDonald was an author, a poet, and a minister. So all of these roles obviously influenced his writing. He had 11 children, 6 sons, and 5 daughters. And he talks about that his experience as a father with all of these children really influenced his desire to write fairy tales, specifically for his children, that we still get to benefit from today. Along with The Princess and the Goblin, there's a sequel to this book, The Princess and Curdie, and then there's also another fairy tale that he wrote, The Wise Woman, among many other books. Many people credit George MacDonald as the father of fairy tales. So listen to this list of people who have been influenced by George MacDonald's work. J.R.R. Tolkien, or can I say Tolkien? I always want to say Tolkien, and it's a little fancy, but I think it is the right way to say it. C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, and Madeleine L'Engle. Other authors that are not necessarily fantasy or fairy tale authors are Lewis Carroll, Mark Twain, Enid Blyton. And if you are not familiar with Enid Blyton, you might know her from The Famous Five, which is a popular children's book series in England, but also Malory Towers, which I have not read yet, but is actually on my list to read. And so at some point I will probably do a book review on those works also. All right, so we talked a little bit about George MacDonald and who he is and the type of writing that he wrote, but let's kind of just set the scene for the 1800s in England where he wrote most of his work. So thinking about that, I couldn't help but think of Thomas C. Foster's How to Read Literature Like a Professor for Kids. This is a fabulous book, but one quick caveat, I really think it should be for teenagers or young adults, because some of the things that he talks about for literary analysis is really not child appropriate. Think Dracula's and things like that. So not really for kids, more for teenagers and young adults. Anyways, it still is a really good book, and I learned a lot about how to analyze children's literature from this book. But one of the things that he talks about is he says it's all political. And what he means by that is he says that nearly all writing is political on one level or another. So think like Charles Dickens. If we think about the work that he did, almost everything he did, just social criticism for his time. George MacDonald is no different. So carrying on with Foster's line of thinking, he says that all writing is political on one level or another, and that writing thinks about human problems, how humans get along, the rights of individuals, and the wrongs committed by those in power, and this book is no different. So as much as The Princess and the Goblin is a fairy tale, and it has all of the hallmarks that you want to see in a fairy tale, it has royalty, magic, good versus evil. It has all of those things, but it is also a social criticism on class systems in Victorian England, as well as gender portrayals. So in Victorian England, males and females were presented in traditional roles where males were active and skilled in manly acts of war, as one researcher put it. Additionally, and more importantly to MacDonald's work, is that males were presented as superior to females. As far as social class in Victorian England, there was definitely a social hierarchy, and there wasn't really any kind of movement between the social classes. So insert George MacDonald, because he wants to reimagine all of that, and you see that in his books. George MacDonald challenges these ideologies, and then he built on prior fairy tale structures to challenge these beliefs that were held in Victorian England. So let's start with the Grimm brothers, right? So the Grimm brothers came out of Germany, and that is where most of the fairy tales that we know, and when we think about fairy tales, we're often thinking about the Grimm brothers fairy tales. Think Hansel and Gretel, Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood. All of those are the Grimm brothers fairy tales, and probably what comes to mind first when you think about fairy tales. Their tropes often include wicked stepmothers, handsome princes, and princesses who are often in need of rescue and protection. But MacDonald and some of the other British authors in Victorian England wrote fairy tales that departed from these tropes, and they put women in a more prominent and strong role. In MacDonald's stories, women have self-determination, agency, and he acknowledges both their emotional and intellectual capabilities. All right, that is enough of the background and the setup. But it is really important because once you kind of understand that lens and the context of when this was written and who wrote it, it really helps you understand the story and the storyline a little bit better. All right, let's talk about a little bit of a brief synopsis that I typed out. So Princess Irene's father is the king of this large country, but she is sent away to the countryside to be brought up there in the countryside. She lives in this large house that is a half castle and half farmhouse with her nurse, whom she calls Lottie, and of course some other maids because she is a princess. So one rainy day, Irene finds herself bored and curious, and she runs up some stairs in this large castle-like house, only to find more stairs and more hallways as she runs. And so she's eventually running into this labyrinth of hallways and stairs until finally it leads her to a door that is partially cracked open, and she hears this humming sound on the other side of the door. So when she cracks open the door, she discovers this mysterious woman who's sewing something and who claims to be her great-great-grandmother. Meanwhile, Curdie, who we will learn about in a minute, and the goblins, who we'll learn about in a minute, but he is a miner, but he overhears a conversation between two goblins and their plan to capture Princess Irene in a vengeful plot against her father. So, what will become of Princess Irene? What will become of Curdie and the Goblin? And perhaps, most importantly, who is this mysterious woman who claims to be Irene's great-great-grandmother? And can she really protect them from evil? So for this book, I'm gonna leave a little bit more of cliffhangers because I think it is so good and really worth picking up on your own. So some key themes. One of the biggest themes I think in this book is the idea of belief and unbelief. We have some groups of people who believe in this mysterious great-great-grandmother, and we have others who don't. And really it is a picture of who can see truth and who can't, and how do these people, some who see the truth and some who don't, how do they interact with each other? Another really important theme is when you lose your way, do you know how to get back? And what is guiding you to get you back home and to find your way again? Other than that, like so many other books, there are themes of friendship, curiosity, diligence, and of course, virtue. At this point, I am going to read a couple passages just to give you a little bit of a feel of what the book is about and the characters. And in fact, most of the quotes that I'm going to read are actually setting up who the characters are, just to give you an idea of kind of this baseline of what the story is going to be about, because MacDonald really weaves in the characters and the kind of problems together. So the first quote I'm going to read, we are going to meet the princess. So it says, "The princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins was about 8 years old, I think, but she got older very fast." I love that. You feel a little bit of C.S. Lewis in that, right? "Her face was fair and pretty, with eyes like two bits of night sky, each with a star dissolved in blue. Those eyes you would have thought must have known they came from there. So often they were turned up in that direction. The ceiling of her nursery was blue with stars in it, as like the sky as they could make it. But I doubt if ever she saw the real sky with stars in it, for a reason which I had better mention at once. But you're gonna have to read the book to find out why her eyes could only see the ceiling in her nursery, but not the true sky outside." The next chapter, I love it, it's chapter 3, I love the title, is "The Princess and We Shall See Who." So I love the invitation to read this chapter to find out who we will see. So Princess Irene has just finished this labyrinth of stairs and hallways and discovered this door with the humming on the other side. So that's where this picks up. When she came to the top, she found herself in a little square place with 3 doors, 2 opposite each other and 1 opposite the top of the stairs. She stood for a moment without an idea in her little head what to do next. But as she stood, she began to hear a curious humming sound. Could it be the rain? No. It was much more gentle and even monotonous than the sound of rain, which now she scarcely heard. The low, sweet humming sound went on, sometimes stopping for a little while and then beginning again. It was more like the hum of a very happy bee that had found a rich well of honey in some gobbler flower than anything else I can think of at this moment. Where could it come from? She laid her ear first to one of the doors to hearken if it was in there, then to the other. When she laid her ear against the 3rd door, there could be no doubt where it came from. It must be from something in that room. What could it be? She was rather afraid, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear, and she opened the door very gently and peeped in. What do you think she saw? A very old lady who sat spinning. So that is our introduction to the great-great-grandmother, but also I think this passage really is going to highlight a point I'm going to make in a few minutes about the descriptive language. So one of the benefits of writing that has strong descriptive language is the role it can play in developing imagination. So sometimes descriptive language can be tedious to read because of the demands on our attention. But if we can train ourselves or train our children to kind of persevere through some of that descriptive lengthy writing, it's actually one of the things that promotes imagination and creativity. And that is something that I think George MacDonald does really, really well. For our last quote, we are going to meet our friend Curdie. So this is how we are introduced to him with a fun little poem. Hush, gush, scurry, there you go in a hurry, gobble, gobble, goblin, there you go wobblin', hobble, hobble, hobblin', cobble, cobble, cobblin', hob, bob, goblin, ha! There, said the boy as he stood still opposite them. There, that'll do for them. They can't bear singing, and they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow, and they don't like other people to sing. The boy was dressed in a miner's dress with a curious cap on his head. He was a very nice-looking boy, with his eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was about 12 years old. His face was almost too pale for beauty. All right, so I chose that passage also because we get a little bit of a glimpse of the goblins, which I did not talk much about, but of course the goblins live in the mines and under the ground. You have to read the book to find out who the goblins are and how they came to be, but we know from that passage that they cannot stand a rhyme or a song. But Curdie knew how to scare off the goblins and send them from above ground back to where they belong, underground or in the mines. And at that particular moment, that was exactly what Irene and her nurse Lottie needed. So a couple of things to consider. The first one is that this story was written in 1872. And so the style, the pace, and the word choice is obviously going to be quite different than what a 2024 reader is accustomed to. So for example, as I mentioned before, George MacDonald creates environments and develops his characters through a lot of descriptive language, which tends to be a little bit more tedious. But if a reader can work through that, they are rewarded with rich and beautiful stories. And I do think that MacDonald does a good balance of keeping some intrigue and mystery throughout the book, that even if a reader might be turned off a little bit by the descriptive language at first, their curiosity, just like Irene's curiosity was stronger than her fear, I think that their curiosity might be stronger than the work required to put into the reading, and they will be richly rewarded. It is a really beautiful, fun story that is well worth reading. One of the topics that I'm really interested in my PhD program is called joint media engagement. And that is just something that is exactly what it sounds like, that an adult, ideally, and a child are interacting with media jointly. And for most of the work that I do with joint media engagement, it's talking about some sort of digital media, but technically books are still media. And I think that this is still a strong case for when joint media engagement comes into play. Because when a parent who can model kind of pushing through the language and ideally even reading together with your child and pausing and pointing out things and yes, of course, checking for understanding, but also just kind of building on what you're reading and engaging with it together, you really have this opportunity to model what good, strong reading is, and to model the patience that it requires to get through harder text that might have, like I said, descriptive language or words that we might not be as familiar with, and then really see the fruits of that labor. And that's something that can be done together. And in fact, I would recommend that this is not a book that you would just hand your child, but that this is a book that you would find time to read together with your child. Well, The Princess and the Goblin is a book that sparks the imagination of both old and young. It honors virtue, faithfulness, belief in the truth, and simultaneously elevates the relationships between both males and females. He holds them equally as far as value. And in fact, I was even telling my husband that it's called The Princess and the Goblin, but I was like, this story is just as much about Curdie and his character and his courage and his story to believe as it is the princess. I think it could be really read for everybody, but it is just a wonderful, fun read that I really hope you consider picking up and reading with your child. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, please be sure to like, subscribe, and if you stayed this far, drop me a princess emoji or a crown emoji in the comments below. That will be really fun to see. And if there's another book that you want as a book review, or if you have some other information or questions about George MacDonald, go ahead and leave those in there as well. And I will also leave all of the articles that I read or the resources that I used to kind of build my understanding of some of the context around George MacDonald. I'll leave all of that linked below as well. So thank you so much again for watching, and please share this video if you know somebody who you think would benefit from hearing it as well. I will see you next week with another book review. Bye.